Hi everyone, and welcome to the overview of AWS ETL tools video. This is a companion video to the article that you can see on your screen, which is available at sqlpipe.com/blog/AWS-ETL-tools. So this article is going to give you a brief overview of the current open source tools that are available to move data around on AWS, as well as the AWS managed versions of those tools. And also I'm going to compare and contrast those against SQL Pipe, which is my product, and hopefully give you an idea for when it might be an appropriate thing to use versus these other tools. So the beginning of the article is just a listing of all of these tools. So you have Spark, Presto, and SQL Pipe, all three of which are free to use. Then you have the AWS managed version of these tools, namely EMR, Glue, and Data Pipeline. Glue and Data Pipeline are frequently, I won't say confused, but it can be confusing when you would use one or the other because the marketing materials for them make it sound like they're almost the same, but really they are quite different. And then, of course, you have the managed ETL platforms, which we're not really going to cover in this video because I think a lot of companies actually resist using them because one, you have to trust another entity with your data, and two, there's kind of a long process whenever you need to adopt a platform like this where, you need to go through a sales process and then you need to do onboarding and you have to get buy-in from your security team to make sure that they can't see your data and stuff like that. But I did go ahead and recommend a few of them. So you have the big enterprise players that I'm highlighting on screen right now, and these are generally well received. I literally just copied and pasted this list from the Gartner Magic Quadrant. And then you have the startups, which I usually prefer these guys. They're kind of smaller products that maybe are built using newer technologies, probably lower cost. In any case, the ones that I've been impressed by are Stitch, Hevo, Fivetran, and Xplenty. So if you're interested in adopting an ETL platform because you don't want to use these do-it-yourself tools, these are the ones that I would look at personally. Okay, so let's get into the actual tools. First up, definitely the 800-pound gorilla in the room is Apache Spark, which was originally developed in academia, but then later donated to the Apache Software Foundation. So, it'll always be free, it'll always be open source, which is really nice because, even if, let's say you were in one of those ETL platforms and that company, went under, and startups definitely do go under all the time, you wouldn't have to worry about that happening with a free tool like this, where you are managing and deploying it. And let's look at their website. You can see here, honestly, I don't love Apache Spark's website or its documentation, but it is a really powerful tool with great educational resources and troubleshooting help online just because it's such a popular tool. And if you're interested in Apache Spark, I would really recommend looking into Databricks, which is a company, I believe it was at least co-founded by Mate Zaharia. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing his name, who was one of the original authors of Apache Spark. And they've definitely continued development, Databricks has, that is, and they've really developed it to the point where it's a real competitor to traditional data warehouses like, say, Redshift or Snowflake. And some of those initiatives are like their Delta Lake, which they claim helps create a data lakehouse. We really need to stop coming up with these crazy names, but really Databricks is it's the most advanced version of Apache Spark. I don't think it's all that expensive, and if I was going to adopt it, I would definitely check it out. So what does Spark actually do and what is it? So it's a Scala program that can connect to and query data from various sources. So those could be, traditional databases like Postgres, SQL Server, these kinds of things. I believe it connects to them through the JDBC. And where it really shines is when it can connect to data that's in storage platforms like S3 and Hadoop file system, HDFS. And when it can connect to those flat file storage systems like S3 especially, it supports what's known as horizontal scalability, which, if you don't know, you can connect a bunch of computers together to create a cluster, and that allows you to drastically increase throughput. So, you have really large in industry Apache Spark clusters that are processing massive amounts of data every day. And that's a pretty common thing for these big companies. They'll have massive Spark clusters doing tons of analysis every day, moving data around, performing computational analysis, this kind of stuff. So in our case, we're interested in using it for ETL, and Spark can load data from these various systems into RAM, and it can also run analytics on that data in kind of like a data lake platform. But it can also transfer data from one system to another, which is in essence an ETL pipeline. And if the result of a query is too big, it can spill to disk. I don't believe it even has to do that when it's running ETL pipelines. I think it can just go straight from one to the other. Not totally sure. And yeah, let's just get to the pros and cons. Spark is the gold standard ETL tool, which everyone else needs to measure themselves against. And its popularity is another pro. Just it's so easy to find educational and troubleshooting resources. In fact, I even took a class from Mate Zaharia at Stanford, and we altered the uh, engine that creates query plans and like getting a view of the internals. It's a super advanced, super mature, well-tested piece of software, and you shouldn't hesitate adopting it if you really want to commit to embracing all of its functionality. But I will caution you that data lake initiatives, and Spark does create a data lake, they frequently end up stalling out before they can create any real value. If you click on this link right here, it's a real thing. Like a lot of companies try to create a data lake without having the right technical talent or without having really objectives before getting into it. And you should definitely avoid that because that'll leave a really bad taste in your mouth when it comes to analytics projects, when probably most companies would be better served with a traditional data warehouse. So, pros, super well tested, popular, and powerful tool. Cons are that it kind of incentivizes building a data lake, which most companies don't need, and it can be very hard to use because it has so many features. And really, if you're just trying to move data into a data warehouse, very common use case, a tool like SQL Pipe is definitely going to be easier to deploy and use. And we'll get to SQL Pipe in a little bit. The next tool in our list is Presto, which is a tool that is very similar to Spark in a lot of ways, that was originally developed at Facebook and later donated to the Linux Foundation. It is also open source. And the story behind Presto is a little unfortunate at this point. A group of engineers who, I believe it was some of the very first engineers who started the Presto project at Facebook, they created their own fork of Presto, which is now called Trino. And there's kind of been a little bit of drama going back and forth between Trino, adding features and not adding it to the original Presto fork, and then the original project doing the same. And this segmentation definitely hasn't helped the Presto project as a whole. It's really too bad, but I still really like the project, and honestly, both forks are still pretty much the same. There's some features in one that aren't in the other, but I wouldn't hesitate to recommend either project, Presto or Trino, because they're both mature, well tested, and mainstream options, even if they're not quite as popular as Spark. And what is it? I should mention what it is, right? Like I said, it's a lot like Spark in that it's a Java, not a Scala, but a Java program that can connect to and query data from various sources, including relational databases, as well as flat file storage platforms like S3 and HDFS. I may have just copied that directly from the Spark description, and that is for a good reason because it is a very similar tool. So, it has all these similarities, but because of the way you interact with it, it's more often used for interactive workloads. And you may wonder, what is an interactive workload? And maybe I should even define that here. Is, using Spark, you're usually doing like batch computation or ETL work, even though it can do other stuff. Usually that's what you use Spark for. whereas Presto is more frequently used for, you hook it up to your Tableau or your business intelligence or visualization tool where you already have data in a data lake and you want to query it to try to gain some sort of business or other kind of insights. So that's kind of the difference where Presto is used for these like real time, I want answers, whereas Spark is used more for like big batch processing workloads. And I've never really gotten a good answer as to why that exists, but I think probably the best explanation is that the way you use Presto is you use SQL. So, you type select star from where, these kinds of things, whereas Spark, while it does support SQL, it also supports using PySpark, which is just Python scripts, or Scala to create routines. So, Presto basically uses a declarative language, whereas Spark uses what's known as, I think it's procedural or imperative. And that's probably where the difference is from. Um, that's what I think. What can it do? Basically the same stuff. Don't really even need to talk about it. One notable difference is that it has custom data connectors, whereas Spark makes use of the JDBC. So this is the Presto documentation. Um, I happen to like the Presto documentation a lot more than Spark's documentation, by the way. So that's one possible positive. But yeah, you can see all these things that it can connect to. Pretty impressive list of custom connectors. Also, Apache Pinot is a super cool project. I believe it's by LinkedIn that's making real-time analytics on huge amounts of data possible. Can probably close this, close this. Yep. And so Databricks is the company that's monetizing Spark, and you have two main companies monetizing Presto. You have Ahana, which is monetizing the original branch of Presto, and a relatively new company. I've actually spoken to the CEO before, and I really was impressed by them and their project. I would not hesitate to reach out to them if you want some help with Presto. And then on the Trino side of things, so instead of presto.db, you have Trino, and you have an explanation of why they had to rebrand Presto as Trino. I won't go into it now, um, but Trino is the name of the fork, and the name of the company that monetizes that fork is Starburst. And I've also had a conversation with them, and they seemed like they really knew what they were doing. They also have a book. Um, so yeah, Ahana or Starburst are both great options for getting help with Presto. And pros and cons, pretty much the same thing as Spark. And pros, well-tested, high-performance tool that can move data. Um, Not quite as popular as Spark, but definitely lots of good educational and troubleshooting materials online, and really good docs. I love their docs. Cons, it incentivizes creating a data lake, which if you need it, great, go for one of these tools. If not, I would definitely just stick to a traditional data warehouse such as Redshift or Snowflake are the two options that I would recommend if you're on AWS. And then we have my tool, SQL Pipe. So SQL Pipe is just a data transfer tool, and I developed it as a response to a problem that I ran into over and over again as a data engineer, which is why is it so hard to move data from point A to point B, usually from a production database to a data warehouse? And, Spark and Presto are both really great tools, but their primary function and most of the code revolves around creating a data lake and then running massively parallel analytics queries on those data lakes. So while they can build data pipelines, usually it's because you're trying to create a data lake and, you know, that enormous amount of other stuff in the projects just makes them kind of hard to use. And a lot of the time, I actually had trouble using these tools to do exactly what I wanted, which is I want to go from, SQL Server or Postgres or whatever else it is that you have, and I want to go into Redshift. So what is SQL Pipe? Really all it is it's just a program written in Golang, and it's a web server that listens for HTTP requests with some information in it that triggers a data transfer. And so you configure the web server with a single config file, and the server is literally just an executable file. There's no dependencies or anything like that. It's just a very simple, small program that can move data. And as you've probably noticed, moving data is not special in and of itself, but I think SQL Pipe is special because I really tried to adhere to the Unix philosophy of making one tool a small tool that does one thing well. So, it's easy, it gets out of the way, and it tries to do less, not more. So, pros and cons, literally what I just said, easy to use. One thing that's worth noting is that it's really easy to integrate with other tools. So anything that can send an HTTP request can trigger SQL pipes. So if you're using Apache Airflow, or even if you're using AWS data pipeline, which we'll get to in a bit, or I'm sure Jenkins or Ansible, these kinds of things can all send HTTP requests. It speaks the lingua franca of the internet, so you don't have to use some special client to use it. You can basically use whatever to trigger it. Like I said, easy to deploy. It's just a binary executable file, no dependencies, just download it and start. This also makes it great for running in containers, and it's quite fast and efficient. It's not massively parallel like Spark and Presto are, but in my experience, that doesn't really affect selecting data out of one database because your database probably isn't massively parallel unless you're using HBase or something like this. So it doesn't need to be massively parallel. It can move millions of rows per minute and uses less than 1 GB of RAM. You can deploy it on a EC2 instance, a micro instance if you want, and that's actually what we recommend. Cons, all it does is move data. It doesn't double as a query engine. It can't create a data lake, but that's not a con if that's not what you're trying to do. Another con is that it's a new tool and does not have a robust community yet. All right. Oh, also, it doesn't have as many connectors as, say, Presto or Spark does yet, but we are working on building more over time. And if you're interested, we can definitely add a data source for you. Okay, and now we're going to get into the AWS managed versions of the free tools. AWS doesn't have any products itself that really moves data. It's really just repackaged versions of other tools. And actually, my favorite of the AWS managed tools is EMR. And I find it the easiest service to recommend because it's just an easy way to deploy a cluster running Spark, Presto, and actually a bunch of other projects. So you could deploy, I don't even know what all of these things do, but you have Spark, you have Presto, Presto SQL, which was renamed to Trino, Hive, which was kind of um, kind of a predecessor to Presto in a way, just a way to create a data lake, and all these other things. So you can deploy a lot of stuff with EMR, and it sets it up for you, and it makes sure that all of the computers can talk to each other. So it's a really easy way to deploy. Say you need 5 EC2 instances running Spark, you can just do it. And for me, that peace of mind that I just click a button and Spark is deployed properly, that's worth the small EMR upcharge. And there is a small charge for it, but it's not much. And pros and cons, you spin up a giant cluster running properly configured software. That's great. And also, AWS has some good getting started tutorials. Obviously, AWS has the staff and resources to create great documentation, and they did not let us down in that regard. The cons of this product, it's kind of hard to call this a con, but just how easy it is to deploy Spark or Presto with EMR, it kind of like it hides the fact that it's a difficult tool to use. So, you'll deploy it and maybe your POC ran great, but then a few weeks in, you're going to start to run into problems where it's like, oh, this tool can talk to this thing, but it's not quite supported to insert into this other thing. I've run into these problems many times where because you didn't directly control the way it was deployed, you can't directly control all of the dependencies and whatnot. It's kind of hard to go into, but it hides some complexity from you, and that ends up being difficult to resolve later. It ends up creating problems that are difficult to resolve later. And small upcharge, but I wouldn't worry about it too much. I think it's just like a few cents per hour. Yeah, so if you're deploying a computer, it costs this much, and this is the upcharge on that. So not too bad. Okay, now we're going to start to get into what I actually find the most interesting AWS managed service because it's the only one that really does something that nobody else does. And all it is just managed Spark. So it's in one way, it's like an EMR cluster where you press a button and you get Spark. But it's different in that it's serverless. So you don't have to deploy a certain amount of servers. You don't have to grow or shrink the cluster. It's just serverless, quote unquote. And what makes it interesting is that it actually has some data cataloging um, features. So if you have, your database is running in RDS, that is Amazon's database service, excuse me, and you can tell Glue, hey, go into RDS and tell me what's there. And Glue will go into there and it'll crawl the data. I believe there's actually yeah. So Glue will crawl your data store and build a data catalog. So, you don't have to know, or I won't say you don't have to know, but it will tell you exactly what's in your database so that you can go and um, and ETL that data. So, in the AWS Management Console, you can see your data catalog, you can trigger crawls, you can also trigger jobs, and because Spark supports the use of um, procedural programming with PySpark or Scala, as we discussed before, it really has the ability to create complex dependency relationships. So, you can say, once this job runs, once this job finishes, start this other job. Um, you know, Pretty sure you can do some async stuff as well. So you can really get into some complex dependency um, workflows with with Glue, and that's pretty cool. So it can crawl your data, it can catalog your data, it can orchestrate a workflow, and all of these things really add up to Glue being kind of a one-stop shop for building ETL pipelines. That is very interesting, but the only problem that I have with Glue is that while yes, it does support building these jobs, I don't think it's as good as a proper workflow orchestration tool, which, you may be familiar with Ansible or Jenkins or, any of these tools. Chef, Puppet were before my time, but I know they're pretty popular tools before that. But definitely Airflow is kind of the modern gold standard for building ETL workflows. You'll definitely be better served using Airflow to develop your workflow dependencies. And in fact, I'm pretty sure AWS even has AWS Airflow. They even have, yeah, they have managed Airflow. So if I was doing this, I would just combine Amazon EMR with Amazon Managed Airflow instead of trying to do everything in AWS Glue. That's just me. Okay, so we already talked about what it does, pros and cons. It's managed, and actually it would probably be a little bit cheaper than EMR because it's not running all the time. You can build some pretty complex workflows with Python or Scala, and it catalogs data. That's really the special thing, is that it can catalog your data. Cons, hard to use. Not gonna lie, I've literally never been able to get a usable ETL pipeline out of it. And that was after, a couple days of trying. I was definitely getting close, but none of these tools are easy to use except SQL Pipe. And this one-stop shop mentality means you kind of have to learn a lot of stuff, and it makes it a good generalist. But in the end, you'd probably be better served using an individual tool to fit your use case, notably Airflow and then EMR. Like I'd rather use Airflow and EMR over Glue, if that's me. Okay, and then we have it's kind of diet AWS Glue. We have AWS Data Pipeline, and they seem similar on the surface. They're both managed services that move data around in AWS. However, data pipeline is really stripped down, and it's kind of in this weird spot where you could just use cron to do what AWS data pipeline does. It would be a lengthy, complex cron script, but let's go into the docs. Basically, what AWS pipeline does is it's just like, at this time, I want you to run this job. And why couldn't you just use cron for that? And I guess it tries to make itself stand out a little bit by having a pipeline definition file. So it's actually just JSON, which is kind of interesting. Um, yeah, I've never seen ETL pipelines specified with JSON, but um, here it is. And let's just get back to the main page. What does it do? It allows you to schedule jobs. It deploys infrastructure, so you could deploy Spark or Presto or SQL Pipe if you wanted to, and trigger commands on that infrastructure. It has a basic concept of preconditions, so that allows you to express some sort of workflow relationships. But that's only really simple stuff like don't start this data copy unless the table exists. So this simplicity really holds it back in the end where you either need complex dependency relationships or you don't. And if you do, you should use something like Airflow. And if you don't, you should probably just use the simplest tool possible that you already know, which is probably cron or, maybe even just a Python script or something like that. So pros, AWS managed service, pretty simple, allows for basic data integrity tests, which are specified with preconditions. Cons, you have to learn and use these other tools. So why wouldn't you just use those other tools without the added complexity of data pipeline? And that's what I'll say about that. Okay, so going down to conclusions and recommendations. First of all, if you have experienced data engineers on your team, or you are an experienced data engineer, you should probably just use whatever you're already comfortable with. So if you know how to use Spark or if you know how to use Presto, for the most part, that tool can get the job done. Um, if it can't, then maybe try SQL Pipe. And there's also lots of other ways to move data around. These are just the most popular ones, plus my product. If you're starting a new analytics initiative, or if you're looking for alternatives to those ETL tools, if you want to create a data lake, really the two best solutions are Spark or Presto. However, if you just want to ETL data to a data warehouse such as Snowflake or Redshift, this is really where my product SQL Pipe shines and is designed to be really easy to get going quickly. So if you want to contact us for a free consultation, just hit us up on the contact page. Or alternatively, our product is available for free and you can go right over to the Getting Started page. There's a nice Getting Started video and you can see pretty short Getting Started tutorial. And that's because it is designed to be extremely easy to use. All right, and if you don't have any technical staff that are available to spend their time on this project, and really you're going to need someone working on this with most of their working hours to make good progress on it, then maybe a managed analytics platform can fill some of your needs. So for example, if you're trying to do analytics on your Salesforce data, well, Salesforce owns Tableau, so probably you can just hit up Salesforce and see what their managed ETL platform is. Guarantee they have one. Don't even know what it's called. Then you could probably have a managed platform to fill your need. Or, for example, if you're using some ERP platform, probably SAP, you know, there's definitely going to be an SAP ETL platform. In fact, I believe I even listed it at the top of the page. Yeah, SAP has a ETL platform. So, if your use case is going from these extremely popular programs such as an ERP or Salesforce, or HubSpot is a popular CRM as well, there's probably going to be a managed ETL platform that can do a lot of what you need. But if you need to combine it with data from your product or some external data source, you're really going to need to hire some technical staff and build data pipelines yourself. And don't be afraid of that, because using data effectively is kind of a calling card of the successful firms of our time. Just look at Google, Facebook. Like, these are the firms that are growing, and they are the ones who can make use of data. All right, so that's it. I hope this article has helped you understand the mainstream ways of moving data, and I wish you the best of luck in your new analytics project. You can contact me, contact SQL Pipe, if you want help understanding any of the information in this article. I'm happy to do consulting work, whether it involves SQL Pipe or not, and I do have experience with both Spark and Presto data lakes. So yeah, just hit us up. All right, thanks for watching. Bye.